So welcome everyone. We're going to begin this. This is being recorded. My name is James Whiting. I'm the chair of the TESOL Teacher Education Interest Section. And I'm welcoming you all here this morning for our discussion session and our discussion session with Dawn McCormick and Ben Naismith from the University of Pittsburgh. English Language Institute, but also I understand Ben is with Duolingo. So I'm sorry if I got that a little bit confused there, Ben, but I think that you'll also introduce yourselves since we'll clarify that. So Professors Naismith and McCormick are going to lead our discussion this morning on representation in teacher education materials and content. And this is, we're really grateful that they're able to join us and to do this for us this morning. And we should have a really interesting, lively discussion. This will last until around noontime, Eastern time in the US. I'm sorry that we're starting a few minutes late. That's the last time. I'll apologize, but it's been crazy trying to make this work this morning. And so I'm real sorry that we're having a little bit of a delay, but I will now turn it over to Ben and to Dawn to begin the discussion. And again, thank you all so much for joining us. And if you have questions as they are speaking or as I'm speaking and you'd like, you can put them into the chat and I will try to answer questions or get them to Ben, to Dawn if we need to. All right, well, if you're not speaking, the only other thing I'll ask is that you keep your microphone muted. Thanks. Ben and Dawn, I will now give it over to you.
Thank you very much, James. So welcome all. Thank you for joining us this morning, evening, wherever you are in your time zone. If you don't mind, Ben and I will just say a few things about ourselves. Ben, if you would like to start.
Sure. Yes, I'll just reiterate. Thank you, everyone, wherever you are, for joining us. My name is Ben Naismith. As I was nicely introduced, I am a graduate of the University of Pittsburgh, and I currently work as an assessment scientist at Duolingo. And I guess relevant to today, before that, I've worked in material development, in publishing as a writer and content and copy editor for Cambridge University Press and Macmillan and other publishers like ABAX in various places and continents around the world.
Thanks, Ben. My name is Dawn McCormick. I am currently at the University of Pittsburgh. I have multiple roles. So I'm the director of our English Language Institute. I'm also a faculty member in the Department of Linguistics, where I serve as the TESOL certificate advisor. So I usually teach our pedagogy courses related to the TESOL certificate program or our degree programs. And I also teach the material development course. So the topic today is one that likely you all are familiar with to some degree. For me, it's a growing knowledge base that I'm creating for myself, and I also hope for my students the same. Our goals today are just to increase our awareness of the concept of representation and related ideas. And then increase our knowledge of resources. So we hope that everyone walks away maybe with another step in your own knowledge development and maybe a new resource that you can tap into. So the format really is intended to be interactive in a discussion. We have some resources to share with you during the presentation and for you to check, but otherwise we really are hoping to get your responses and get what you shared organized so that we can put it back out as a sort of a working document for you. So what we'll probably do for much of the day is share a question or a topic or a task. And then because we do have, at least 12 folks with us, we might break into 2 chat rooms so we can then come back. That would allow folks with a little more contact time, if that's okay with everyone. Is everyone able to join chat rooms with whatever vehicle they're using today? Give me a thumbs up or a green check or a thank you. Some people have not indicated, but we'll hope for the best. All right. So we do have, yes, the question is, are you able to do breakout rooms? Yes, I got a chat. Okay, yes. All right, great. So we do have a Google Doc link that I had certainly hoped was working and it's up, but it seems like you need access. So we'll work on that during the task today to make sure you can get access to that document. But otherwise, we're going to start with the question of how we define representation and why it should be a consideration in teacher education. So that's our first question, just to sort of tap into what you bring, your concepts and your definitions. So if you don't mind, I'll break us into 2 rooms and give us about 5 minutes to talk. Is that okay? We'll just give another moment for everyone from group 2 to join. Thank you. All right, is there a spokesperson from group 1 who'd like to share their thoughts on how we can define or even operationalize representation?
If it's okay, I could just volunteer. Well, one of our members, feel free to say no, but maybe Keisha, you had a very succinct definition, if you wouldn't mind sharing, or I can paraphrase if you prefer.
My memory is crazy. So I may need your help if I forget something, because I think also Deborah mentioned some really good points. So one of the things that I wanted to mention is that we did talk about was representation and the materials that we use as we prepare teachers. So not just how different cultures, whether or not they're represented, but how they're represented, whether or not that's accurate. Also, the perspectives from which our materials are written. That's something that we must also consider. And when we think about diversity and inclusion of people, we have to think about LGBT communities and whether or not they're represented when you're discussing families. Social class, very important. And I think that Deborah had mentioned, gave an example about Malaysia and how those students are often not, I guess, properly represented in the materials that they use because their teachers are probably not accustomed to, using those particular materials. Maybe they're prescriptive. And so those are some of the ideas, I think. And yeah, I think, did I miss anything, Ben? I don't know.
No, I think that was an excellent summary of our chat. Thank you very much.
Okay. Mm-hmm.
Thank you. Anyone from group 2 who'd like to share the thoughts that were discussed there? James, if you'd like to give it a go, you need to unmute.
I realized I was muted. I was going to say that Nikki had some really interesting ideas, and I thought that she could do it, but I'm happy to try to jump in. But Dawn, you please feel free to supplement whatever I'm saying. I think we brought up the idea of just looking at the range of identities that are out there in the world and being conscious. And I think that for me, that's a big important step, just being aware and conscious of trying to bring in different kinds of identities into our classrooms in different ways, through materials, through readings, and through discussions, and being conscious of the range of identities. And we can fill in the blanks for what those identities are, because I think we all know them. And I think Keisha spoke to many of those. I think one that Keisha, I didn't remember hearing, but maybe you did mention, was the idea of also linguistic identities, the idea of native and non-native speakers, and having those as part of the representation of our teachers. And because there's, of course, many teachers of English learners who are non-native speakers of English themselves. And so having the teachers as well represented that way. And just being aware and conscious and trying to make that our work, I mean, in my case, making that my work to try to bring those kinds of identities into our classrooms. And so, anyone else who was in my group or in our group? Dawn, Nikki, anyone else?
I think that was great too. I agree with Nikki. Yeah. So I think one of the common elements that I think all discussed is that it's who and where and what and how, that there are many dimensions. And it does include for all of us the materials that we present to our students to read, the textbooks that we're helping them develop, or the materials, the teachers that we read about, the context that we read about, the researchers we choose to have our students read, all of that. And so I thank you for all for sharing that. I think that's pretty general yet comprehensive. So our next question deals with the maybe specific subjects to connect to. And so I'm going to share a link. This is a textbook series, and it connects to an organization that Ben made me aware of. And as part of this, they list some example subjects that they do try to attend to in their work and in their texts. And it connects back to some of the, I think, the people that we were discussing in that first question. Who might we be reading about or talking about or trying to increase our awareness about? And so with that, the next question for us to think about is really some of those groups or individuals. And the question is, any of these they're listed in the textbook page as sort of subjects. So that's how I'm referring to them now as a topic for a textbook series. So what subjects do you connect to? What subjects do you think your students connect to? And what subjects would your teaching context connect to? And maybe even your future teaching context, because I know that's something that Nikki talked about, is preparing our students for the future and future teaching contexts. So I just want to have us review that list for a few minutes. Again, I'll put us into some breakout rooms, and we can just talk about how we relate to some of these. Well, thank you all again for your participation. Rather than sort of debriefing after that one, I'd like to actually move right into our third, which actually is a task. Ben, are you able to, you're going to take control of this one, I think?
Yes, why don't I see if I can share my screen here? Might be easiest. And this actually very naturally, I'm not sure what the other groups are speaking about, but in one of our groups, we were discussing how these types of diversity are represented in images and some of the challenges of actually finding a range of images that to capture these different aspects of diversity. So just as an example of some of those practical challenges, I thought we could look at some of the images available. So let's see here. So if you can see on the screen here, this is Shutterstock. And so working with publishers, a lot of the time we use stock images and different publishers have different agreements and relationships with different stock images. So one of the big ones is Shutterstock. You might have also seen Getty Images. So some of these are the huge libraries of different images that we go to. And one of the interesting things, if you've worked in material development and have to find images, is you know, you're under a time crunch and you're trying to find things quickly, is what happens when you search for different things, especially related to people. So maybe in the chat, if anyone has, we'll do this and we'll see what happens together. A search image, a search term to put in here, something involving people, and we'll see what pops up. So you can add something in the chat, anything related to people. English learners, okay. Let's see our learners first. Okay, so any adjectives that pop out for these pictures represent? I'll scroll slowly just to give a broad overview. So imagine you're a coursebook writer, and you're under a time crunch, you're trying to find pictures, and this is what you're given. True, they might not necessarily be language learners. So quite a lot of lighter complexions, that's definitely true. And I think this one is actually darker complexions than some other search terms, like if you type in happy family, there's a lot of white families. Yes, age, definitely. So stock images skew younger all the time, that's for sure. even if you search occupational terms or other social terms, and this is something James brought up in our group, was the types of images it tends to be of. Attractiveness is highly valued in stock images, and so that tends to skew younger and thinner. Yes. Okay, sure, I can try ESL. But yes, I don't know if other groups have talked about class or socioeconomic issues, but this is definitely a trend in this materials as well. This might not have as many people. Let's see. If I just do ESL, I'll do ESL students. There's some cringe-worthy images. Okay, so if you just only looked at Shutterstock stock images, your representation of what an ESL teacher looks like would be sorely mistaken. So this is an interesting activity for teacher training as well, is looking up different search images, seeing how they're represented by some of these, and this is the biggest banks of images that large course book material developers use. Great, so Deborah has suggested pixabay.com. I'm not familiar with Pixabay, but great, we'll add it to our resource list for people to look up. Let me stop sharing the screen here for a second.
So Ben, did you want to share the ELT pics and the Aging Better resources, or?
Sure, we can put in the links, or I can share it on the screen. That's a good idea. So I was going to check out Pixabay as well, but it says here that's free and with open license, so that's great. So this is an excellent type of resource. So there's, looks like Pixabay here, and there's two more that Dawn's put here as well. ELT Pix is, I'll just mention a plug for this one, which is crowdsourcing teachers around the world who have given up their own images and tagged them and put them into this shared collective database. So it's free to use in any pedagogic materials. It started on Twitter, and it turned into a Flickr account and a website. And this one, Aging Better, maybe Dawn, you can talk about it. This came up in one of your TESOL talks from another participant, I believe.
Right, this is when we had the discussion at the TESOL convention. This was shared by a participant. And so our thanks to that participant. And so it skews to, they actually have a lot of labels as elderly, which is I age. I'm concerned about that particular label myself, but there are definitely folks that are not as young as what you would find on Shutterstock. So if you want to try that out too as another option, you can take a look at that. All right. So based on what we have discussed so far about potential subjects to consider, people, perspectives, definitions, resources to consider for photos, for example, and representation visually. The next question we'd like to throw out for us to talk about in groups is sort of a bigger question. And that is for us to take that concept of representation and think about how it connects back to issues of diversity and inclusion. I mean, maybe for many of you, these topics are all connected. For us at the University of Pittsburgh, certainly with our Office of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion, I'm not just trying to relate our students to what they're preparing for the future, but I'm also trying to situate what I might be teaching with an overall goal of the university to increase attention to the areas of diversity, inclusion, and equity. So I just want to give us a few minutes to think about how do we connect this topic of representation to some of those bigger issues. All right, well, welcome back all. So the first thing I want to do is put in the chat room something that you may not be able to access, but the intention is for there to be a Google document with some of the resources that we mentioned today, and any that you'd like to share. So I'm adding my email address to the chat room. If you'd like to ask to be invited for access to this doc, if you can't access it, or you want to send me anything to my email address that I can then, like a resource or a piece of information you want to share, then you're welcome to do that. And I just want to spend the last few minutes talking about, actually, sort of our last question is, so what do we do next? How do we move forward? How do we increase our own knowledge about representation? How do we help our students learn about it? How do we move forward in any direction? If anyone's willing to share ideas, go ahead, James.
I just wanted to say that I know there were a few minutes before 12. And I apologize about the fact that we started a little bit late. So if we run a little bit over and you're not able to stay with us, thank you so much for joining us. We will probably run a little bit later than we had expected to, but not a heck of a lot later because of the techno staff snafu. So sorry to interrupt.
So Keisha, can I ask you to, if you don't mind sharing what you shared when we had that last discussion about context and authors, would you mind sharing that? Because I think that is a step forward.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I guess Alma prompted the discussion in one of our groups previously about the context being very important. And so we have to kind of keep in mind when we talk about representation, the context. And I think you all brought up safety and how we have to make sure that depending on where you work, you have to keep your students safe and yourself safe. And so even though we want to make sure that we have this representation across the curriculum, safety is also important. And I share that one of the ways in which I introduce, I guess I continue to practice allyship and making sure that different peoples are represented is I look at my syllabus and I look at the readings, and hopefully I see that the identities of these authors are what's represented. So I may not be able to give examples of LGBTQ issues within my curriculum, right? But I make sure that there are authors that I personally know who identify as such on my syllabus. And the same thing with authors who are of African descent. I know that I don't find many examples of African, languages or ELs within my curriculum unless I really do a whole lot of digging, but I make sure that I utilize articles and resources from these individuals so that there is some level of representation. Because the question that I came up with is that, can there be representation without diversity and inclusion? Can there truly be representation? So that's what I shared the group.
Thank you so much, Keisha.
You're welcome.
Other thoughts about steps that we can take as teacher educators?
I would just to echo what Keisha just said, and I think that for me, that's my work as well. That kind of that first step of kind of consciousness and awareness, and trying to look at things that I'm assigning and the images and the questions, and just upping my awareness so that I'm more kind of conscious of this idea of diversity and representation within the diversity of the kinds of things that I'm using with my teacher educators. Which I think is the idea that Keisha was getting at, that she was making much more eloquently than I'm saying, but the idea of just kind of raising my awareness and my understanding of what I'm giving my students to address this.
Thanks, James. Ayana?
Yes, thank you. Hi, Dawn. Hi, everyone. I'm Ayana Cooper, serving my last year of service on the board. Yay for me. But I wanted to say a next step we can take is really hold these conferences more accountable. I just do some informal research on my own, and I can list at least 6 conferences, language teacher education focused, that do not have any keynotes or invited speakers of African descent. And when I email and inquire about the lineup, I'm told things like, That's a really great suggestion. We appreciate your feedback, but maybe next year. Well, when next year? Next year, 2023, 2024? Like, which year are you talking about? Because I'm talking about now. So I'd like to see us do more in regards to the conferences that we're attending and supporting and, you know, advertising and all of that, that they're more inclusive. One in particular has two keynote speakers. They look like women of Latino descent. And they also have some special sessions on Afghani students and also Asian students. And when I inquired about something about Black English learners, I was told there was no room and perhaps next year. And I also am the board liaison for the TESOL convention, and that in and of itself has its own barriers, but I'm working at that. So I just wanted to raise that as a possible next step or area of attention as well. Thank you.
Thank you for that. I think that's a great point. And if there are any conferences that are either doing a better job of that, we'd like to hear about it so that we can support them, or if there are any conferences that are doing a poor job of that, so that you know, we can also not just your own emails to them, but more voices adding to that. That would be great.
Yeah, thank you, Ayana. Ayana, do you mind if we give a quick plug to your book?
Always, darling, please go for it.
So Ayana is actually it was mentioned as a reference. I'm going to just use the Corwin. Do you tell me if this is I hope this is the right one. So Ayana wrote a book called And Justice for ELs, a leader's guide to creating sustaining equitable schools. It's actually one of the items that's on the list on that Google Doc. If we can access that, it's something that was shared by a participant at the last talk, and so I wanted to make sure that that gets shared out directly with you all, because I think it's a potential resource for us.
Thank you so much. And I also have this one, an edited volume with myself and Dr. Wad Ibrahim. Dr. Keisha Bryant has a chapter, Black Immigrants in the United States, Essays on the Politics of Race, Language, and Voice, 11 chapters of just wonderfulness. So I'm putting that link in there as well. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm going to add that one today to that list.
And since we're plugging, I would also say that you have a chapter in the book that I edited with Heather Linville, the chair-elect of the intersection, that Keisha and Ayana both have a chapter, co-wrote a chapter in our book on working with English language learners, Black English language learners, in particular, the advocacy piece within that framework. And so I think that's such a key piece, the advocacy of working with students, and in particular, different populations of students. And so there's such a wonderful chapter, which distills a lot of really important information for that population, working with that population and advocating in particular for them, Keisha and Ayana. And
I'm happy to include any of those, James, on that list. And
yeah, and I guess what I'll say is that maybe when I send out the recording email, which comes out in about a week, sending out the recording of this conversation, I can include links that that we can just share these links. And I think you did that after your discussion session in Pittsburgh. And I know that there were some really interesting links there. And I looked at those again this morning. The link from OELA, for example, that you had in there about Black English learners as they're classified by OELA. That was a real eye-opener to me. I had not seen that data before, so that was really interesting there.
Right, I'm putting that in there right now, just in case somebody wants to check that out. Yeah, and so, yeah, thank you for that, James, for being willing to put that together. Any other ideas for moving forward, resources to share?
I'll just say that those of us who are in positions of power, whatever that is, we're in charge of hiring, we're mentoring doc students, we're accepting students into our programs. We need to also consider representation and diversity and equality across our profession, because sometimes we have to understand that mentorship does not happen in graduate programs for students who have been historically minoritized or marginalized. And so sometimes we have to take the initiative to reach out to them and consider ourselves a mentor for these populations, giving them opportunities to write with us, giving them opportunities to attend and present at conferences with us, right? Giving them opportunities for, if you know that you're going to interview them, they may not have had the opportunity to practice these they don't have interviewing skills like how some of the others who are more privileged may have had. So we need to really, really do a better job of kind of mentoring individuals to assume positions within our profession, right? Teacher ed, even English language institutes, or whatever it is that they want to do. If they want to go alt academic or outside of academia, if we're in a position to help them, we need to try to do that, because I think that we can talk about diversity and representation in materials, but ultimately you have to have that, amongst your publishers and editors and what have you, so that they can value the voices of people who have historically been marginalized and not been heard. So I just want to throw that out there.
Adding that to the list of how we can move forward. And Ayana's comment too about speakers and representation at conferences.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Dawn and Ben, do you want to have some final words, or shall I wrap things up?
I just want to thank everyone for coming. As I mentioned, this is an area of interest to me that's growing as a professional. So I really appreciate having those of you who have far more experience than I in this area participating and sharing. And I hope that I can participate in other conversations or presentations and continue my learning. And I hope that goes for everyone here.
I think that's very well said. I agree with Dawn on all that. And I'd also add that there's other areas that I'm also interested in my own work related to assessment research. So speaking about inclusion and diversity in relation to assessment and also big data. So as it relates to AI and corpus linguistics and all these other aspects of the language learning world. So if anyone's interested in any of those topics, please reach out. My email's there as well. I'm always happy to talk about it.
All right, well, I will wrap things up by thanking everyone for joining us this morning or this afternoon or this evening, depending on where you are. And thank you so much again for your patience as we began this morning with the little technological difficulties getting in here. And thanks very much to Dawn McCormick from the University of Pittsburgh and Ben Naismith, am I saying that right? From Duolingo and / University of Pittsburgh. Congratulations, Ben. I understand you've just finished and defended your dissertation. So wonderful, Dr. Naismith and also Dr. McCormick. Thank you so much for joining us and really leading this really wonderful, rich conversation this morning. That's such an important topic in TESOL and teacher education. So I really appreciate your willingness to take your time and to lend your expertise to this conversation as part of this conversation this morning. I will send out a recording email in a week or so once I get it from Nancy Flores at TESOL, and I'll send that with the links that Dawn has given me to kind of wrap up this conversation. And maybe we can continue it next year in Portland in an informal conversation there as well. I look forward to seeing you all in person in Portland. And more immediately, I look forward to seeing any of you who want to join us, who can join us next month. We'll have a TEIS town hall on the 13th of August, and that's a Saturday, but it's the day that works most for everyone that's involved in that. And that'll be led by Konduk and Bridget, who are the newsletter editors for the TEIS intersection. And they are going to be coming out with the summer newsletter in the next couple of weeks. And then we'll use that town hall on the 13th of August from 10 to 11 a.m. Eastern time to discuss the newsletter. And it'll be a really interesting opportunity to meet some of the writers and to discuss some of their issues, articles, and to have a conversation that will kind of also double as a town hall for the intersection. So read the articles, come talk to the authors, come talk to the editors of the journal, of the newsletter, and meet the rest of the board as well. And I think that'll be perhaps the day that we'll allocate for the TEIS intersection next month as the intersection, as Nikki talked about in her email a few days ago. So nice seeing so many of you again this morning. Keisha, Ayana, Dawn, Ben, Deborah, and Nikki, and all the rest of you. Thank you so much. And please join us next month if you can. Bye now.